Today I'm going to show you guys 3 different ways or 3 different types of meat you can use to make pemmican. And yeah, so this is a London broil. We have a bottom round and we have lean stew meat. Now what do all 3 of these have in common? They're all sirloins. So the first thing that I'm doing, and I'm going to start out with the London broil just because this is the most time consuming. The other 2 ways are designed to help you save time, save effort. If you want to do it, classic way, go ahead and get yourself a sirloin roast and you're going to cut it with a knife. First thing I do though is I like to wipe it dry on the outer layer. I just don't like cutting wet meat. I don't want my hands to be all wet and stuff. So you can use a glove. The 1 glove method works well, but I'm not doing that. So the other thing I'll say is, if you have access to grass-fed, pasture-raised beef, if you know a local hunter that can get you, some lean sirloin roast, those are going to cut the smoothest, the easiest. Those are what's going to dehydrate the best. So that's what I recommend. This, I literally got it from Walmart. So again, this is a London broil. You can see it's a roast. Just wipe the outer layers. And I'm going to do one more step before we get into cutting. So before we get to cutting, I like to sharpen my blades. I got this cool electric blade sharpener that I'm going to use. It's really convenient. Any sort of blade sharpener is going to work, but this is going to make cutting the meat a lot easier. You don't want to cut a lot of meat with a dull blade, so just make sure you got a sharp blade. Okay, so the stage has been set. We're ready to cut our meat. And yeah, so critically important step. There's 2 really important things here. The first, you don't want to cut thick jerky. That's not going to dehydrate as well. Now, if you want to save yourself some jerky to consume, you want to, instead of just pemmican, then yeah, do your thick cuts. I like thick cut jerky. The second thing is if you have, really thick chunks of fat, cut those off. And if you can save those for like jerky, it's not going to dehydrate completely, but like a fattier cut does add a little bit of flavor for jerky purposes, but for pemmican, not the case. And remember that when you're out shopping at your stores, when you're looking for a London broil, try to grab the leanest London broil you can get. Try to grab the leanest bottom round roast that you can get. If it's got a lot of marbling on it and there's one that's leaner, always go for the leaner one. Other thing you can do is you can kind of look and see the outsides, okay, I got some fat on the outsides there. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I'm just going to cut that off right from the start just to kind of, that's that. I don't want that to be a hassle. I don't want that. If you're looking for ways to get more fat, you can put this off to the side. You can cook this up afterwards. So if you got all your fat trim, go ahead and cook that at the end, or you can discard it. So you can kind of tell what's harder fat and what's not. That's really not a big deal. Not stressing about that. But now we're ready to start cutting. And yeah, so critically important, you don't want to have really thick jerky. So this is a pretty big thing. So I'm actually going to cut it in half. And there we go. So what I do is I just try to cut it as thin as possible. Don't overthink it. And you're going to just do this for the entire roast until you have a bunch of really thin jerky. Let me show you guys an example. You can see pretty thin, extremely thin. An example of too thick would be like that. That's too thick. It's just, you want to get it a little thinner than that. So when you get the dehydrator at the end, you can kind of tell. It's like when you're about to put it in your food processor and grind it up, it's like, oh, that's pretty thick. That didn't dehydrate completely. I'm going to throw that to the side for jerky. So this will probably end up being jerky. So once you get that all cut up, you're going to take your dehydrator tray and you're just going to put it all on there. Make sure, the big thing is you don't want to have too much overlap. So I try to cram it as much as possible, but I don't like having jerky sitting on top of each other. So again, don't overthink it. I got 8 trays. This is just one of them. And I'm just putting this on the dehydrator. Yeah, and so as I'm filling up the dehydrator trays, I'm just putting it back into the dehydrator. That way you don't have it all stockpiling and have to do it at the end. And just, work as you go. And so I'm setting the temperature to 165 degrees Fahrenheit for about 21 hours. And that's going to ensure that the jerky is brittle dry like a potato chip. And yeah, getting out of the cold ass garage. Next method is stew meat, lean stew meat. So it's literally labeled lean stew meat. You can see it's pretty lean. So if it wasn't lean, I would guess it's probably from a chuck. I'm assuming this is like a round or some sort of sirloin because it's lean. And what it looks like is these little cubes. Now you can try to just put these on like that. You don't even necessarily need to do it. But I like to cut the bigger ones in half just as a precautionary measure. So I'll just show you what I do with that, and you can kind of go from there. So I usually just cut it in half, take it. You're just taking your time with this thing. You just cut it in half, and you can just do it like that. So, you got a piece like that. Maybe I'll cut it into thirds. Simple as that. And then I'm just piling it on like so. And then you're kind of reading it as you go. Maybe you get one that's already pretty good to go and doesn't need to be cut like that. It's like, okay, that's good to go. I'm just going to throw that in there. And then you just kind of, cut it in half and then cut it in half, place it in. Simple as that. All right, guys, this is the last and easiest way to get the pemmican jerky prepared, and that is with these lean bottom roasts. Look, you can see it's already thin, so technically you could just throw it on, you're good to go. But what I like to do is I'm gonna take it's a little frozen, I see, so I'm gonna take half of it, and I actually got a little bit of this fat. Just rip that right off. Just rip it right off. And so then you're gonna take all this meat. Real simple. Simple as this. Sorry, I need a napkin. Basically I like to cut it a little bit thinner just so I can space it out a little bit better on my dehydrator. But I mean, good to go. We're already good to go. So this is like sandwich meat, I think it could be labeled, but this is just really thin bottom round. As you can see, it's already good to go. But I'm literally just putting that, excuse me, just putting that onto there. Good to go. I mean, it's probably the easiest way to do this is buying this super thin bottom round roast, which is like sandwich meat. And it's a little frozen, so it's got a little bit of ice and stuff on it, but whatever. And then you can see it's now all in the dehydrator. It's going. We're just doing it for about 21 hours at 165 degrees Fahrenheit. There we go. All right, guys, so jerky has been dehydrated. I'm gonna just give you a quick look at this. So this is the thin bottom round. So this is like sandwich meat that you can get, really thin cut. Very brittle. See that? See how brittle that is? That's what you're looking for. Do another one for you. Sandwich meat, very brittle. This is the London broil that I cut myself. Again, what's the pattern? It's brittle, very brittle. The stew meat, so the cube stuff, a little harder to be honest, but it is still dry. If you want, you can just eat that as jerky. Not a bad idea. So next step, you wanna take your dried meat, put it in the food processor. We're gonna grind this up into a powder. So if you have a lot of jerky, you want to do a little bit at a time. I guess maybe I'm a little impatient, so I fill it up pretty much. It's still gonna grind. If you have like harder chunks like this, you probably want to do a little bit at a time. But and like you can get it as ground up as you want. I usually get it super ground up, but I'm not like super anal about it. Like if there's a little bit of like unground up jerky in my pemmican, it's really not a big deal. And then you can add more jerky as you go. As you can see, it's pretty ground up. There's still a little bit of chunks in there. This is what I mean. Like, this isn't like the biggest deal if you got that, but I'm gonna grind this up a little bit more just so I can get it even more fine. And then that's gonna allow us to infuse more fat into the pemmican. So the more powder you have, the better the fat's gonna infuse. So I'm actually gonna grind the stew meat up separately, and I'm gonna keep some of this for jerky, like just like little jerky nuggets. And then I'm going to grind some of it into powder for meat soup. So I like to, you can put the powder in hot water, add a couple spices, you got yourself a nice little beef stew. So I just have a food scale here now. I'm just gonna scale it out because when you have the meat powder, it infuses at a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you're getting started and you kind of want to understand how much fat do I put in my pemmican, get a food scale, measure it out. Whatever you get in grams powder, do in grams of fat. Now, as you get the hang of this, it's actually not that, you know, whatever, if you put in excess of fat, it'll just sit at the top. It's really not a big deal. Personally, I like fattier pemmican. I value fat. So I tend to make fattier pemmican, but for this video, I'll show you guys how to do it with the scale. The other thing that's good about a scale too is that you can kind of understand the caloric density of your pemmican brick because it's pretty much pure protein. So that's 4 grams per calorie. And then fat is 9 grams per calorie. And so, you know, whatever you get in grams of protein, you multiply that times 4. And then, you know, whatever that is for fat, you multiply that times 9, add those two numbers together. And that's how much calories you're going to have in your pemmican. So I got about 262 grams of meat powder. I'm gonna round that up to 263. And so we're gonna add 263 grams of fat to this. So this is the stew meat. I actually just grounded it all up and you can see, you know, it actually dehydrated pretty good. So, you know, it looks like stew meat works just as well. Next step in the process, we have suet fat. We need to render this down into a tallow. So we're gonna render this, and in the end, it's gonna look like tallow. Now this is at room temperature, and as you can see, it's pretty impenetrable. I've had it sit next to a crock pot, so it's a little soft, but not too soft. If you have something like tallow from fat trimming, it'll be really squishy, and your product is gonna end up being really squishy. Now, if you wanna get the shelf life stable, firm at room temperature pemmican, you gotta use suet tallow or any other kind of fat that's really high in stearic acid, because stearic acid is what keeps these things pretty solid. And suet fat has more stearic acid than marbled fat, lard, butter, etc. So the way I do this is I like to dice it up. And just put it into my pot. And this is just fat, so I mean, you can just use it as a lotion. So my pot's pretty full, so I'm gonna get to business. Show you guys how I render this suet. So I have the temperature set to about medium. You want it either right at or slightly below the burn point, the smoke point of your oil. And you can do low and slow if you want, but I think with my method, you can do it a little bit hotter and you're not gonna burn the fat. And you're just gonna periodically strain out the oil. So not that oil's not just sitting at the bottom heating up. So you're gonna periodically strain out the oil and then continue to render down the fat. So basically it looks like this. So I do a little bit then. You know, just periodically mix it around, just so not all the same fat sitting at the bottom. And so you can see as it's rendering down, the suet is sinking to the bottom. And so you'll kind of be able to tell when there's nothing left. It'll look just like a crispy fat trimming, and you'll be able to tell. So you can see it's extremely rendered down now, and I'm pretty much done. That's just fat trimming. You can eat that, discard it, do whatever you want with it. Throw a splash of salt on there, I don't care. So that is our suet yield. Pretty massive yield, to be completely honest. And so what I'm gonna do now is I'm actually gonna set that in the freezer to let that solidify. So give it about 30 to 40 minutes to solidify, and then we'll be able to measure that out for the pemmican. So it's not completely frozen, so I'm gonna scoop this out. If it was completely frozen, you'd be able to flip this and it would just fall right out. But I'm growing impatient. So I'm gonna grab a spoon. We're gonna measure out 263 grams of this, but that is what your tallow looks like once you render it. Like I said, I got this excess fat. Don't be afraid of the fat. There you guys go. 3 grams over, so 266 grams. We're gonna render that down. We're gonna infuse it with that. It's gonna go in the freezer for another 30, 40 minutes. It's gonna solidify, and then you have your pemmican. So now, we're gonna take the fat, we're gonna infuse it into the meat powder, we're gonna mix it around, and then we're gonna put it in the freezer. We're gonna let it solidify, 40 minutes, you're gonna have pemmican. People ask me if I get enough fat. What do you think? Then we're gonna just set that in there. Like so. I'm gonna shut this. See you in 40. So, it's been in the freezer for hour and a half, and you want to let it get completely frozen, because then you're able to just flip it and it will just fall out. If it's not frozen, it'll stick to the sides. It's a little bit more of a mess, but here it is. That is your brick of pemmican.